Hi, today we're going to cover Dr. Alan Guttmacher and the 6 things you need to know about Dr. Guttmacher and how they impact us in a post-Roe world, because in your daily life, in your family, in your workplace, you are dealing with his work from the 50s and 60s. So many of you have heard of the Alan Guttmacher Institute. It is widely known, it is well funded, and it is respected by many people. So we're going to take a look at 6 facts about Dr. Alan Guttmacher and how we got where we are today in a post-Roe world. And much of it comes from his life, and many people don't know that. So we're going to cover that today. Number 1 on our list is that Dr. Guttmacher was considered the father of Planned Parenthood. He himself was an OBGYN. He was the 2nd president of Planned Parenthood. The first president was, of course, Margaret Sanger, their founder, who we've talked a lot about. And Guttmacher was number 2, but Guttmacher gave you what your Planned Parenthood is today. He certainly structured Planned Parenthood in its modern form much more so than Margaret Sanger. Not in philosophy. They were both out there. We'll get to that. We'll try to use a little humor to keep this vlog going. But just in structure, he really created Planned Parenthood as we know it today. Number 2, this is where it starts to go a little weird. We don't have a soul, according to Guttmacher. We're soulless. You don't have a soul. I don't have a soul. He doesn't have a soul. And that resulted in his view of the human person and his view of the relationship of men and women. His view of women was basically that they were sexual objects. He believed, he was a Darwinist, as most of these people were, to the extreme. And he saw the role of male and female as going together because women didn't have mating seasons like other species. So women, you could have sex with them whenever you wanted. You didn't have to go find another female who happened to be in a mating season when your female is no longer in the mating season. And so he had this real sexual view, and he said the benefit of evolution, what that did is it made the men not run out and go get another female who was in mating season, but stay with that female so that he could protect that female. So his philosophy was that women give men sex, and men, in exchange for that, give women protection. It's not the most romantic thing in the world, but it gets a little worse. So his exact quote on intimacy or the beauty of the sexual union, he didn't really have anything to do with that. He thought that that really needed to go away, and he said, quote, this was his vision for the future: "I am quite confident that creation by means of the sexual act will be considered antiquated. Conception will be an impersonal process involving ions and atoms, flasks and fluids." So he wasn't the most charming guy at the prom, but this had to do with his view of the human person as soulless, and we certainly, and we've encountered them everywhere, and we know them in our lives and our families, women that have been abused by men, women that have been viewed as sexual objects. That's just prevalent. But he's saying it in the 50s and 60s with this cold, sterile view of the world, and we've certainly seen it play out as women feel like they're empowered if they, use sex. It degrades them further. It's this endless cycle. And so that was his view of them as is in the 50s and 60s. Number 3, he believed in eugenics. And not like, hey, abortion supporters believe in eugenics. No. He believed in eugenics, and he was vice president of the American Eugenics Society.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
So we have to back up. Yes, there was an American Eugenics Society. I don't encourage you to join it or buy their t-shirt. And yes, he was the vice president. No, I don't know who the president was, but you got it. Guttmacher's a VP. you got to be out there to be the president. So he was vice president of the American Eugenics Society. Number 4, he believed in forced abortion and forced contraception. Now, this is where his view of a voluntary movement, you'll hear that in a moment, he feels that's not working. Voluntary movement is like you can choose to be on contraception, you can choose to have an abortion, freedom of choice. Hear that a lot. He didn't think that was working too well because he was a big believer in overpopulation. Okay? And so that was like, it's nice if people can choose, to have an abortion, but forced abortion may be required, and that's just not me saying that. So about forced abortion and contraception, he said, eventually, coercion may become necessary, but most likely first in India and China. Other countries that aren't the West. So he thinks that we're going to have to start using coercion, but the New York Times did a profile on him a couple of years later, and he really doubled down on this view. Here's the quote from the article. This is what the New York Times said. Guttmacher is buying time. He thinks the voluntary movement should set a deadline of 1980. If world population growth has not dropped below 1.5% by then, Guttmacher says we will have to get tough.
I must break you.
So China, or Russia, thank you, Drago, they don't talk about forced abortion anymore. China had forced abortion, and then there were videos and wonderful pro-life people that exposed that. They don't even talk about it now. Guttmacher is talking about it in the 50s and 60s and saying, if we don't drop below 1.5% by 1980, we're gonna have to get tough. He's we should have used Back to the Future, like Biff. He's like, we're gonna get tough. He's that guy. And so the whole notion, first off, his math is off. So even if you're a eugenicist and you love Guttmacher and you love abortion and you think we're way overpopulated, his math is way off. We had a huge cliff in population, and we've talked about that on the podcast. So there was a cliff in population. So not only was he wrong, he's saying that by 1980, no more voluntary abortion or contraception. We're going to have forced abortion and forced contraception, and I'm sure forced sterilization. So that's number 4. Number 5, he gave us the classic arguments that we hear. So we have arguments now like forced birth that are just ridiculous, but those old school arguments, they're all from him. And going into this, I want to let you know, and we put it in the book, What to Say When, I think it was 1967, Guttmacher said that there was no need for a woman to have an abortion. An abortion can never save your life, okay? And he said that as an OBGYN. So he believed that, and he said it. We put it in the book. But he knew that wouldn't sell. So he did create Health of the Mother that we hear all the time. And he said he wanted to include emotional health, financial concerns, anxiety, all of that to justify saving the life of the mother. And that is where we get the life of the mother argument. So he gave us that classical argument. He gave us we're overpopulated. That was his. He also gave us the classic abortion should be between a woman and her doctor, which former abortion doctor, Dr. Haywood Robinson, has said many times that I'm not her doctor. I didn't know her name. She didn't know my name. I'm her abortionist. And she has a doctor somewhere. He probably doesn't even know she's having an abortion, but I'm not her doctor. But that's from Guttmacher. Abortion should be between a woman and her doctor. He also came up, and we definitely see this in a post-Roe world. June 24th happens, and all of a sudden, this is gonna hurt minority, poor women. All Guttmacher. The guy wants to use coercion to do abortions and contraception in India and China. He has no problem using minorities to sell abortion. So that was his as well. He also made contraception mainstream. That was really one of his Now it is. It is mainstream. It's mainstream among many Christians. You know, it seems like the responsible thing to do. But he really pioneered that. It wasn't something talked about a lot, even in the 50s. But he firmly believed that contraception should just be a normal part of life, like taking an Advil. And he said, quote, you really couldn't say this now, I don't think, without being laughed at, but he was saying it in the 50s and 60s. When you give your kids keys to the car, be sure to give them contraception too.
Hey, great gift, Dad. Thanks, son.
So yeah, maybe not, definitely not the warmest husband or boyfriend, and maybe not the warmest, dad. Can I take the Corvette out this weekend? Yes, son, here's your contraception. All right, this soulless thing's getting a little weird, Dad. So that was his belief. He helped make it mainstream, and he definitely helped give us these classic arguments that we've heard from abortion advocates for decades, but are still here. And that's exactly what they fall upon, what they relied upon after Roe was overturned. The Supreme Court justices have to raise these kids. We're overpopulated. Woman and her doctor. Life of the mother. That's all Guttmacher. That's all Guttmacher. Okay, number 6. He foresaw the transgender movement. He helped start the transgender movement, and he thought gender was meaningless. And that he's just foreshadowing. All these things are crazy, but that back then, this is why perhaps he's so revered. Hopefully he's not revered for being vice president of the American Eugenics Society, but he is revered for his view of transgenderism and how mainstream it has become. My concern, if I believed in transgenderism or I claimed to be trans, is that this came from someone who believed I had no soul. And so that would be concerning to me. But he, long before anybody else was talking about this, he said, quote, "Science will allow us to bypass the need for biological maleness and femaleness." So science will allow us to bypass the need for biological maleness and femaleness, and that is sadly is being abused. Of course, you ultimately can't get rid of that because it's literally in our bones, but you can try to get rid of it through bad science and through evil. And through seeing the world as he saw it. So as a review, the 6 things you need to know about Alan Guttmacher. Number 1, he was the 2nd president of Planned Parenthood. He's considered the father of Planned Parenthood. Number 2, he believed we were soulless. Number 3, he believed in eugenics and was vice president of the American Eugenics Society. Number 4, he believed in forced contraception and forced abortion. Number 5, he gave us the classic pro-abortion arguments. And number 6, he foresaw the transgender movement. So those are the 6 things you need to know about Dr. Guttmacher. We did a deep dive on him in a podcast. It got a lot of responses, and so we wanted to do a simplified version of that. But be sure that you rate and review or leave a comment at the bottom of this YouTube page or YouTube video, and share this video because there's a lot going on right now in a post-Roe world, and Dr. Guttmacher helped get us here, and it should allow us, as we look back on his life, of just how wrong he was and how everything he worked for, everything he strived for, and the fact that Roe was overturned and that half the country rejects abortion, and that his quotes and his views, they can be laughed at, and we should laugh at them to keep ourselves going. But we take this work very seriously, and that's the mentality that many in the abortion industry come from, is this degrading view of the human person, which is why we have to fast, why we have to pray, and why we have to have hope in the public square to overcome the dark, sterile view and mindset that so many people in our culture have. And they don't have to, because as we know, we're not soulless, and life is indeed good.